I'm not going to wear the mask. Not going to be able to read through that. So hope you'll forgive me. So in 1941, Jewish comic book authors Joe Simon and Jack Kirby published this cover of a Captain America comic. Can you put it up, the slide then? Thank you. Shows Captain America punching Hitler. And this was at a time when the US hadn't even entered World War II. In fact, at the time, the United States' participation in the war was contentious. But Joe Simon, the artist, was disgusted and afraid by the actions of the Nazis and intentionally made a political cartoon. It was his argument for the US to enter World War II. And a lot of folks thought this was going too far. You know, this is one of the things that I've learned about Captain America in the past 2 years as I've been reading his comics. And I just want to say that comics have always been political. This isn't anything new. So just bear that in mind. So you see, I'm a nerd. That much is really abundantly clear. I have tattoos in Vulcan from Star Trek on my arms. And my idea of a great Friday night out is going with some friends to the latest escape room or playing an overly complicated strategy board game. But for whatever reason, I never got into comic books. I'm not a big fan of violence, which felt like that was what comic books were about. Nor did I like the idea of one person, usually a white guy, being the pinnacle of strength, of saving people. Seemed kind of uninteresting to me and maybe even a little dangerous. So when my kid moved in with me at 4 and was obsessed with superheroes, I, not wanting to force my own interests on them, begrudgingly began watching Marvel movies. I wanted to be able to answer their questions. And as the nerdier one of me and my wife, this duty fell on me. We can't make our children into what we want them to be, right? It felt important to connect with them on this, but apparently children can make their parents into what they want them to be. I was quite taken with the Marvel movies and quickly found myself wanting to read the source material. You can take down that picture, I just realized, so people online can see my face. And so I began reading the comics, kind of randomly and haphazardly. And my friends, I got sucked in just a little bit. Now, I have a tongue-in-cheek saying about the kind of media I like to consume, the kind of authors I enjoy reading. And it goes like this: everything's better if it's a woman except me. Okay, so if you don't know me, this is an inside joke because I'm a transgender man. So I clearly made this choice not to be a woman. Obviously, this statement is a little reductive and misses the wonderful non-binary people in my life. And I also mean no offense to the lovely men that are here and in my life as well. But as a transgender man, I've always found it odd that I generally prefer and relate to stories written by women and about women. So I was drawn in comics to Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel, She-Hulk and Spider-Woman. And I rounded my initial exploration with Black Panther, whose movie I particularly enjoyed for its Afrofuturism stance. And I wasn't disappointed in reading these comics when I found a Pakistani Muslim teen hero struggling with her identity, and a woman figuring out what it means to be a superhero, and a king grappling with what it means to be royalty in this world. But somehow, and I really don't know how, I ended up reading Captain America. And I don't mean recent Captain America. I mean Captain America starting in 1968. And I read the entire run, all 355 issues, all the way through the 90s. Now, I was kind of unimpressed with the movies. He seemed too serious and boring, with the exception of the fact that he starts out as a scrawny, young-looking short guy, which I kind of identify with if you'll put that slide up. It's kind of, I've actually had strangers tell me I look like him before the serum, so you can take that down. So anyhow, other than that, there wasn't much in the movie for me. Now, the comic, in case you're not familiar with it, begins with Captain America being unfrozen, at this point a decade out of time. And I found myself surprisingly taken by him. 1969 found him meeting Sam Wilson, also known as the Falcon, a man who would become his partner and the first African-American superhero in comics. A man who, in 1981, the comic introduced a gay character, a childhood friend of Captain America's, who is bullied and attacked for being gay. And Captain America says to him, that's not because of who you are, that's because of society. Pretty radical at the time. But what's more is that I found a surprisingly relatable man in this comic book superhero character named after America, for God's sake, a country that I have a fraught relationship with, whose history I increasingly feel angry about, and whose present feels like it's slipping away from a potential ideal. How did this happen? And what does it mean for us as Unitarian Universalists? As soon as Martha told me we would be doing superhero curriculum for religious education this year, her idea, not mine, I knew that I needed to preach about maybe my favorite superhero, Captain America. Someone who I think embodies Unitarian Universalist values, our commitment to living them, and our own Americanness. Did I say that? Our own Americanness? Yeah, Unitarian Universalism is kind of an American religion in a lot of ways. You see, Captain America isn't about patriotism for patriotism's sake. It's not about holding up the United States of America as being better than everyone else. He's not about the melting pot. He's not even about centering himself, no matter how much he gets centered. He's about holding his country, the one he was born into and fought for, up to the ideals that the country says that it believes in and that he believes in. A man who will listen to his Black friend when he tells him the truth about racism, who will work next to his secret agent girlfriend in the 1960s, who spends years working through killing one person on a mission, who makes his money being a cartoonist and an artist, who's sensitive and thoughtful and has a lot of feelings, who holds his country up to what it says it's supposed to be and what he believes it should be. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week when, a little teaser, we're going to have a multiverse sermon, and that will be the end of our nerd series. But wouldn't the world be better if Manifest Destiny hadn't happened? If my ancestors hadn't colonized this country, stolen it from indigenous folks who lived here, enslaved people? Wouldn't the world be a better place? I mean, it does feel like the obvious answer is yes, but that's not what happened. And so here we are figuring out how to live in this country as the place that it is. And so I think Captain America is a bit of an example of how we might do that. For a man who served the military and seems to care so much about his country, Captain America is often at odds with his government. In the 1970s, when Nixon was in office in real life, Captain America discovers that after he has a conflict with neo-Nazis, that one of them actually infiltrated the government and became one of the leaders of the government. The group that was infiltrating it is called the Committee to Regain America's Principles. And Captain America becomes the victim of a false news campaign that frames him as a murderer. Seems awfully familiar. He says, I've seen the big lie technique. Say anything loud enough, often enough, and it sounds like the truth. But I considered it a tool of a totalitarian government and not possible in America. I was wrong. Something I love about Captain America is that he is very much able to see the ways that he's wrong. He doesn't automatically trust his government, and this lesson about how his government isn't always right changes the character for the rest of his life. He learns that anything can happen in the United States and that he cannot go ahead with it just because it's his government. It takes him getting exposed in this way to realize this. And when he does that, he quits for a little while. He gives up his costume and his shield and his name and becomes a hero called Nomad, a hero without a country. He says, the government created me in 1941, created me as their agent in protecting our country. And over the years, I've done my best. I wasn't perfect. I did things I'm not proud of, but I always tried to serve my country well. And now I find out that the government is serving itself. It's not taken well when he steps down. Is this the way it's going to be now? He says, follow my conscience and lose my friends, lose everything except my self-respect. Friends, we know this. Standing up for your ideals isn't easy, but our values and our ideals, they're one of the most important things we have. They are what makes us us. But then he realized that being Captain America isn't about supporting the government. It's about supporting the people. And he takes the mantle back. Now, this resonates for me in a way because I made a choice about this country in a different way than many of you have. You see, I was born in Canada, lived the first 18 years of my life there. I decided to move to the United States for college, a decision with financial consequences that my 18-year-old brain could not comprehend at the time. And since then, I could have gone back to live in Canada anytime. In fact, people often tell me how wonderful Canada is. Elections happen and people want me to move away or marry me and move away. I've had this option the whole time, but I have made a decision. And as I've been here in the United States for over half my life now, this country has become my home, just like this Unitarian faith has. A place with flaws, fraught origins, and values that, though unrealized, I can love. And with people I love and care about, and people I don't know that I also care about. At its best, the United States can be a country that should be welcoming people from all over the world, celebrating the rich differences that we have with our neighbors. Instead, it is a place of gross inequity that hasn't reckoned with or repaired from any of our history. A place where elections feel less and less democratic, where racism is rampant, where we don't really see each other. Where needing to work to sustain and support yourself can be seen as a moral failing, where healthcare isn't considered a human right, where we have enough resources in our country to do all these things as a whole, but fear what would happen if we did it. Captain America recognizes that to truly be Captain America, he has to fight for all of the people who are on our soil. And he has to also believe that anything can happen here. That being in America might protect him from harm. He's a respected white guy after all, but not others. Perhaps not even the vast majority of people. You might feel this way too. I know I do. There's a relative ease in which I can live my life, ignore the realities around me. But to Americans, to be called citizens of this country, of which I am one now, for those of us, it means that we have to take responsibility for it. Responsibility for its past and its present, for the ways in which it continues to push people down. Queer people and Black and brown people and people experiencing homelessness and poor people and sometimes even children. To be called American is not to pledge allegiance to the flag, but to pledge allegiance to protecting its people, all of them, to lifting them up, to lifting all of us up. One of the things that Captain America does that I love is that he intentionally moves out of the spotlight on several occasions. At one point, he's rumored to be running for president, but he doesn't feel that's right for him. He also passes his mantle of Captain America onto his friend, Sam Wilson, a Black man and a social worker, moving away from being at the center. He recognizes that what he can do as Captain America isn't really about who he is. It's about what he represents. A world we can dream about, where our liberation is bound up together. It doesn't feel like there are a lot of models like this in the media. And I think the comic book format actually helps with that. We get to see Captain America's inner monologue, how much he struggles with his decisions and wants to do what is right, how he weighs things that are good or bad. And he's vulnerable in a way that we don't see many people being in media. He admits when he makes mistakes and he tries to fix them. Now, he is by no means perfect. He's a superhero written by fallible people since the 1940s, with hundreds of comics and thousands of appearances. But by and large, he's a good example of how to use your power responsibly, right? With great power comes great responsibility. A Spider-Man quote, I understand. Well, we may not have powers, but many of us, all of us to a degree, have privileges, which brings with it its own type of power in the world. And certainly we have power together as a community, as Unitarian Universalists. Captain America is a good example of someone who has a lot of forms of power and privilege. A white man, an American, even a person with big muscles and a strong body. He's a person who's famous. Captain America is famous and he uses that fame. And with that power and with that privilege, he does things like call out the government. when it's not supporting its people, mentor those who are different from him, youth and people of color. He finds himself fighting for, and more importantly, fighting with the marginalized. From his gay friend in the 1980s to working with those who are experiencing homelessness today, like we talked about in that comic from the Time for All Ages. And he does so without making himself the center of what's happening, by taking the time to listen to those who needs his help. He even sets up a hotline so that anyone can call him because he believes he stands for all people. And by remaining humble and true to his values and willing to change as he learns new things. What's more is that he recognizes that as Captain America, he has a responsibility to the people of the United States, all of the people, not just those who look like him or who were born like him, because he holds its name and was given powers because of it. So he knows what he does is not for himself alone, but for the people of his country. And so for us, there is a lesson about our responsibility. Sometimes, I know I feel this way, it can feel easier just to reject the United States, feeling like its origins and its present are too challenging, too difficult to confront. But the reality is that we are here. We live here. A lot of us benefit from this country, from the things that have happened. As a church, we benefit from the land we're on and the money that's been passed down through generational wealth, some of which is proven to come from slaveholders. And perhaps this is true for many of us in the room as well. So as a people, we have a responsibility, not just to fellow UUs or to people who look and act like us, but for all who live on this land, Indigenous and immigrant, white and Black, and everything else. What does this look like for you? Well, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job and become a social justice warrior full-time. Though if you want to, I'm certainly not going to stop you. It might mean being in solidarity with people you work with who are fighting for workers' rights, or working against white supremacy culture in your organization. It might mean taking on a mentee who isn't someone you'd normally work with. It might mean volunteering to get out the vote or help register voters who are disenfranchised. It might mean reading books that encourage engagement and reflection on our world with your kids. It might look like reparations as a church, or finding ways for us to donate our space to groups working for immigrant justice. I'm reminded of the Episcopal Church on Martha's Vineyard, who housed migrants that were flown there this week. It might mean volunteering for a justice organization and doing whatever they need, especially if it's not glamorous, like stuffing envelopes. So this is my homework for you. It's not necessarily to go home and read a Captain America comic, though if you choose to do that, I have many suggestions. It's to consider the places in your life where you can use your power, your privilege, and the responsibilities that you have. The places where you, in your role, have power, maybe those big muscles, to use that power to uplift us all. And like Captain America, it doesn't mean you have to be perfect or not make mistakes. It doesn't mean you have to always know what's right. It means that sometimes you have to consult with your friends or the people who believe in what you do, your network of Captain Americas, who might very well be the other people in this room or online, about what needs doing and what we can do. We are in this together and we cannot do it alone. So go with friends, use your power responsibility, and never stop being true to your values, your faith, the one we all share, in protecting all of those on this land. May it be so, and let us say together, Amen. Amen.